The night was so dark that Marines standing only a few feet apart could barely recognize each other's faces. The tropical air of Guadalcanal hung heavy with humidity. Mosquitoes buzzed through the jungle. Somewhere beyond the tree line, unseen creatures moved through the undergrowth. The silence felt unnatural, too quiet for an island that had become one of the bloodiest battlefields of World War II. Then came a sound every Marine dreaded. A whistle. Not the whistle of the wind. A human whistle. It echoed through the jungle like a signal from another world. Seconds later, thousands of Japanese soldiers surged forward out of the darkness, screaming battle cries that shattered the night. Machine guns erupted. Mortars exploded. Tracer rounds sliced across Henderson Field. For the next several hours, one exhausted Marine battalion would fight against overwhelming odds in one of the greatest defensive battles in American military history. Standing among them was a commander whose name would become legendary. Lieutenant Colonel Louis Chesty Puller. This is the story of the night one Marine battalion held Henderson Field and changed the course of the Pacific War. Long before Marines landed on Guadalcanal, the Pacific looked very different. In the months following the attack on Pearl Harbor, Imperial Japan had swept across Southeast Asia and the Pacific with astonishing speed. American forces had suffered defeat after defeat. The Philippines, Wake Island, Guam, Hong Kong, Singapore. Every week seemed to bring another Japanese victory. To many observers in 1942, Japan appeared unstoppable. Its navy ruled the Pacific. Its experienced soldiers had spent years fighting in China. Its pilots were among the best in the world. America, meanwhile, was still rebuilding after Pearl Harbor. Most Americans expected a long, difficult war. Few imagined that one small island in the Solomon Islands chain would become the turning point. That island was Guadalcanal. At first glance, Guadalcanal didn't seem important. Dense jungle covered most of the island. Mountains dominated the interior. Rivers cut through thick rainforest. Malaria infected nearly everyone who stayed there for long. Heat and humidity exhausted even healthy soldiers. Yet Guadalcanal occupied a position that military planners considered priceless. Whoever controlled the island could threaten supply routes between the United States and Australia. That meant Guadalcanal wasn't simply another tropical island. It was the gateway to the South Pacific. In early 1942, Japanese engineers began constructing an airfield there. If completed, Japanese bombers could strike Allied shipping over enormous distances. American leaders understood exactly what that meant. They couldn't allow the airfield to become operational. So, in August 1942, American forces launched their first major offensive of the Pacific War. More than 11,000 U.S. Marines stormed ashore. The landing achieved complete surprise. Most Japanese construction workers fled before the Marines arrived. Within days, the unfinished airfield was captured. The Marines renamed it Henderson Field in honor of Major Lofton Henderson, a Marine aviator killed during the Battle of Midway. Capturing the airfield had been the easy part. Keeping it would prove far harder. Japan immediately recognized the danger. As long as American aircraft operated from Henderson Field, Japanese ships could no longer move freely through nearby waters during daylight. This disrupted Japanese plans across the entire Solomon Islands campaign. Tokyo made a simple decision. Retake Henderson Field. At any cost. 4 weeks, Japanese destroyers raced down what Americans nicknamed the Tokyo Express, delivering soldiers under cover of darkness. Night after night, reinforcements poured onto Guadalcanal. The jungle swallowed entire regiments. Hidden beneath towering trees, Japanese officers planned repeated attacks against Marine positions. Their confidence remained high. Japanese commanders believed American troops lacked the fighting spirit to withstand determined infantry assaults. They expected the Marines to collapse once enough pressure was applied. They were wrong. Among the officers preparing defenses stood a man already earning a fierce reputation. Louis Burwell Puller had not been born into military glory. Born in Virginia in 1898, he grew up reading stories about Confederate soldiers and American heroes. When World War I erupted, he desperately wanted to fight. Although the war ended before he saw combat, Puller refused to abandon his dream of becoming a Marine. He stayed in uniform. Over the next 2 decades, he served in places many Americans had never heard of. Haiti, Nicaragua, China. Again and again, Puller found himself leading small units in dangerous conditions. Those campaigns shaped his philosophy forever. He learned that leadership wasn't about shouting from the rear. It meant standing where danger was greatest. His Marines noticed. Puller rarely asked anyone to do something he wouldn't do himself. He marched with them. He suffered alongside them. He endured the same hunger, the same exhaustion, the same fear. By the time World War II reached Guadalcanal, Puller had become exactly the kind of officer Marines trusted. He demanded discipline. He expected courage. But he also inspired fierce loyalty. To many Marines, serving under Chesty Puller meant one thing. You were going into the hardest fight. As Japanese reinforcements accumulated across Guadalcanal, intelligence reports painted an alarming picture. Thousands of enemy soldiers were gathering. The attack would come soon. No one knew exactly where. No one knew exactly when. Every evening Marines dug deeper foxholes. Barbed wire stretched across defensive lines. Machine gun crews rehearsed firing lanes. Mortar teams calculated distances. Artillery batteries registered targets hidden inside the jungle. Every preparation carried one uncomfortable truth. The Marines were badly outnumbered. Supplies remained limited. Food often consisted of little more than canned rations. Clean drinking water was scarce. Uniforms rotted from constant moisture. Boots fell apart.
Many Marines suffered malaria, dysentery, fungal infections, and exhaustion simultaneously. Some lost more weight to disease than combat. Still, every night they stood watch, waiting, listening, wondering if this would be the night. Japanese commanders finalized an ambitious plan. Rather than attacking cautiously, they intended to overwhelm the Marine perimeter through sheer determination. Thousands of soldiers would infiltrate the jungle before launching massive nighttime assaults. Darkness favored Japanese tactics. Their soldiers excelled at moving silently. Many carried bayonets fixed to their rifles. Officers believed close combat would neutralize American firepower. If they broke through the Marine line, Henderson Field would fall before sunrise. Everything depended on surprise. Everything depended on speed. Everything depended on one battalion failing. Unfortunately for Japan, that battalion happened to be commanded by Chesty Puller. Throughout the afternoon, Puller moved calmly among his Marines. He checked ammunition, inspected machine gun positions, spoke briefly with squad leaders, asked if anyone needed supplies. There were no dramatic speeches, no grand promises. His confidence came from preparation. He knew his Marines were tired. He knew they were frightened. But he also knew they had trained for moments exactly like this. As sunset disappeared behind Guadalcanal's mountains, darkness spread across Henderson Field. Aircraft landed one by one before the runway vanished into blackness. Pilots climbed from cockpits. Ground crews secured the planes. The final sounds of engines faded. Then came silence. Not peaceful silence. The kind of silence soldiers learned to fear. Somewhere beyond the jungle, thousands of enemy troops were already moving. Weapons were loaded. Bayonets tightened. Orders whispered. Officers checked watches. The attack was about to begin. And before morning arrived, the fate of Henderson Field, and perhaps the entire Guadalcanal campaign, would rest on the shoulders of one Marine battalion led by Chesty Puller. The first sign wasn't gunfire. It was movement. A Marine standing watch along the perimeter thought he saw shadows slipping between the trees. He narrowed his eyes, trying to separate imagination from reality. The jungle played tricks at night. Moonlight filtered through the thick canopy, turning vines into soldiers and bushes into moving figures. Then he heard it. Branches snapping. Boots crushing wet leaves. Not one man. Hundreds. He grabbed the field telephone. They're coming. Seconds later, a green flare shot into the sky. The battlefield exploded into life. Machine guns opened fire with deafening bursts, sending streams of tracer rounds into the darkness. Mortars launched high overhead before crashing down among the advancing Japanese troops. The peaceful silence that had blanketed Guadalcanal vanished in an instant. The battle for Henderson Field had begun. Lieutenant Colonel Chesty Puller didn't hesitate. He was already moving toward the front. While many commanders directed battles from protected command posts, Puller believed his place was where the fighting was fiercest. He wanted to see the battlefield with his own eyes. Bullets snapped through the air around him. Shrapnel ripped into nearby trees. The ground shook beneath repeated mortar explosions. A young Marine looked at Puller in disbelief. "Colonel, you should get back." Puller ignored him. Instead, he crouched beside a machine gun position and studied the jungle. "Hold your fire until you can see them." Those simple words reflected years of combat experience. Firing too early would reveal Marine positions and waste precious ammunition. Every bullet had to count. Within moments, dark figures emerged from the jungle. Hundreds became thousands. Japanese soldiers charged forward, shouting battle cries that echoed across Henderson Field. The sound was unlike anything many Marines had ever heard. It wasn't just yelling. It was psychological warfare. The attackers hoped the terrifying screams would overwhelm American defenders before they even reached the lines. Instead, Puller waited. Closer, closer, closer. Only when the attackers entered deadly range did he give the order. Fire. The Marine line erupted. Heavy machine guns unleashed walls of bullets. Rifles cracked in rapid succession. Automatic weapons stitched the jungle with deadly precision. The first Japanese wave collapsed almost instantly. But it didn't stop. More soldiers climbed over the bodies of the fallen. Then another wave appeared. Then another. The battlefield became a nightmare. Flashes of gunfire illuminated faces for fractions of a second before darkness swallowed them again. Smoke drifted through shattered trees. The smell of gunpowder mixed with mud, sweat, and burning vegetation. Communication became nearly impossible. Telephone lines were repeatedly cut by shellfire. Messengers sprinted through exploding artillery bursts just to carry a single order from one company to another. Still, Puller somehow remained calm. He moved continuously across the line, checking positions, encouraging exhausted Marines, redirecting fire, making split-second decisions that would determine who lived and who died. His presence mattered. Marines who saw him walking under enemy fire later admitted they found new determination simply because their commander refused to hide. One corporal would later remember thinking, "If Chesty isn't afraid, neither am I." The Japanese attack intensified. Their officers knew surprise had failed. Now they relied on relentless pressure. Again and again, groups of infantry charged directly toward Marine positions. Some crawled through elephant grass. Others attempted to slip around the flanks. Snipers climbed into trees. Light machine guns fired from concealed positions. Mortars rained down almost continuously. Every minute seemed worse than the last. Marine casualties slowly mounted. Medics crawled through mud treating the wounded under fire. Some carried injured men back toward aid stations. Others never reached them. Corpsmen became targets simply because they moved across open ground. Yet they continued anyway. Many would receive decorations for bravery that night. As midnight approached, another crisis emerged. Ammunition. Machine gun crews were firing so rapidly that supplies began disappearing far faster than expected. Belts of .30 caliber ammunition lay scattered across firing positions. Ammo bearers sprinted from foxhole to foxhole carrying heavy boxes while bullets struck the earth around them. One gun fell silent. Not because its crew had been killed. Because it had fired every available round. Nearby Marines immediately shifted weapons to cover the gap. No one could afford a weak point. Puller understood the danger immediately. If enough machine guns stopped firing, Japanese infantry could break through. He ordered ammunition redistributed across the entire battalion. No company would fight alone. Every bullet became part of a shared defense. This decision would prove critical. Then came one of the night's greatest tests. Japanese troops discovered a weak area between two Marine companies. Instead of attacking straight ahead, they pushed through the narrow opening. For a terrifying moment, enemy soldiers actually penetrated the American defensive line. Reports flooded Puller's command post. They're inside the perimeter. They're behind 2nd Platoon. They're moving toward the airfield. Panic spread among some younger Marines. If Japanese troops reached Henderson Field itself, they could destroy parked aircraft, artillery positions, fuel supplies, and communications. Everything might collapse. Puller refused to panic. He immediately organized a counterattack. Instead of withdrawing, he ordered nearby units to pivot inward and trap the infiltrating force. It was a dangerous gamble. Friendly units would be firing dangerously close to one another. One mistake could cause devastating friendly fire casualties. Yet hesitation would be even worse. The Marines attacked. Grenades exploded inside the jungle. Shotguns blasted at point-blank range. Bayonets flashed beneath brief bursts of light. Combat became hand-to-hand. There were moments when soldiers couldn't even fire rifles because enemies stood too close. Knives, entrenching tools, rifle butts. Anything became a weapon. The jungle echoed with screams. Within an hour, the penetration had been sealed. Japanese soldiers who broke through were surrounded and destroyed. The defensive line held. But the battle was far from over. Around 1 o'clock in the morning, Japanese commanders launched their largest assault yet. This time, entire companies advanced together. They hoped sheer numbers would overwhelm Marine firepower. The attack rolled forward like a human wave. Machine guns overheated from continuous firing. Barrels glowed faintly in the darkness. Assistant gunners poured water over weapons whenever possible. Others swapped barrels at incredible speed. Every second mattered. One gun crew fired until every member became either wounded or killed. Another Marine immediately crawled into position and continued firing. Then another. The weapon never stopped. Acts like these occurred across the battlefield. Individual Marines made decisions that history would never record by name. But together they prevented disaster. Puller kept moving. Again and again. He refused offers to remain under cover. Instead, he visited the hottest sections of the line personally. Witnesses later described him standing upright while bullets snapped overhead, calmly issuing orders as though he were on a training exercise. His confidence spread throughout the battalion. Fear still existed. No one could eliminate fear. But discipline replaced panic. Then another emergency erupted. Japanese soldiers had begun targeting Marine machine guns with increasing accuracy. Several crews were wiped out almost entirely. Without hesitation, replacement Marines took their places. Many had never operated those exact weapons in combat. They learned while under enemy fire. One Marine reportedly fired until his hands blistered from the weapon's heat. Another continued loading ammunition despite being wounded. Nearby corpsmen begged him to seek treatment. He refused. There'll be time later. For many there wouldn't be. The battlefield had become a contest of endurance. Who would break first? The attackers? Or the defenders? Neither side showed any sign of stopping. Behind the Marine lines, artillery officers worked frantically. Forward observers relayed coordinates through damaged communications. Gunners adjusted their aim again and again. Soon, American artillery began landing only yards beyond friendly positions. The explosions were devastating. Entire sections of jungle disappeared beneath towering columns of dirt and fire. Trees splintered like matchsticks. Japanese formations were torn apart before reaching Marine trenches. But every artillery barrage carried enormous risk. A shell falling short could devastate friendly troops. Despite the danger, the calculations proved remarkably accurate. Again and again, artillery shattered attacks just before they reached the perimeter. Still, Japanese officers refused to abandon the assault. Wave after wave continued emerging from the darkness. They believed American defenders had to be nearing exhaustion. Surely the Marines couldn't continue firing forever. Surely their ammunition would run out. Surely morale would collapse. Instead, they encountered something unexpected. Every failed assault seemed to strengthen Marine determination. Each attack proved the line still existed. Each successful defense reminded exhausted soldiers that survival depended on the man fighting beside them. No one intended to be the first to fail. As the night stretched toward dawn, Henderson Field remained in American hands. Barely. The hardest hours were still ahead. The Japanese had one final, desperate assault planned. An attack so massive that even Chesty Puller wasn't certain his battalion could survive it. And before sunrise, the battle would reach its deadliest moment yet. Chapter 3. By 3 o'clock in the morning, Henderson Field had become a world of smoke, fire, and exhaustion. The battlefield no longer resembled the tropical island the Marines had landed on just weeks earlier. Trees had been shredded into splintered stumps. Craters scarred the earth. The humid jungle air was thick with smoke and the smell of burning powder. 4 hours the defenders had held. But every Marine knew something unsettling. The Japanese hadn't committed everything they had. Not yet. Reports continued flowing into Chesty Puller's command post. Enemy movement on the flanks. Large formations gathering beyond the tree line. Fresh bugle calls echoing through the jungle. Puller studied the situation for only a few seconds before giving another series of orders. Strengthen the center. Shift another machine gun to the left. Keep the artillery ready. There was no panic in his voice. Only certainty. That confidence mattered. Many of the Marines around him had been fighting almost continuously for hours. Some hadn't slept properly in days. Malaria, dysentery, hunger, and dehydration had already weakened them long before the first shot was fired. Now they were expected to survive one more assault. One final test. Across the jungle, Japanese commanders reached the same conclusion. Their earlier attacks had failed because they had struck in separate waves. This time, they would attack almost simultaneously across multiple sectors. If enough pressure was applied at once, somewhere, somehow, the American line would crack. Thousands of Japanese soldiers prepared for what many believed would be the decisive assault of the Guadalcanal campaign. Officers adjusted their swords. Machine gunners checked ammunition belts. Mortar crews prepared their final bombardment. The jungle exploded. Mortar shells slammed into Marine positions with terrifying accuracy. Trees shattered. Foxholes collapsed. Telephone wires snapped once again. Within seconds, heavy machine gun fire followed. The bombardment was only the beginning. Moments later came the infantry. Entire companies surged out of the darkness. This wasn't a probing attack. It was an all-out assault. The Japanese soldiers charged with incredible determination, screaming as they crossed open ground despite the devastating fire falling around them. Some were cut down almost instantly. Others continued advancing. Behind them came more and more. It seemed endless. Marine machine guns fired until their barrels glowed red. Assistant gunners changed barrels as quickly as human hands could move. Riflemen fired as fast as they could reload. Shotguns thundered inside the jungle. Grenades burst only yards from defensive positions. Every foot of ground became contested. One Marine later recalled that the flashes from thousands of rifle shots made the battlefield look like a violent thunderstorm. The darkness itself seemed alive. Suddenly, disaster nearly struck. One section of the defensive line stopped firing. At first, nearby Marines feared the worst. Had the Japanese broken through? The truth was almost as dangerous. The machine gun had jammed. Its crew desperately struggled to clear the malfunction while enemy soldiers continued advancing. The distance closed rapidly. 100 yards. 75. 50. If that gun remained silent for even another minute, dozens of Japanese soldiers could pour through the opening. The crew fought the weapon almost as fiercely as they fought the enemy. Finally, the bolt slammed forward. The gun roared back to life. The advancing assault staggered under the renewed wall of bullets. Another crisis had been avoided by mere seconds. Elsewhere, Chesty Puller continued moving through the battlefield. His uniform was filthy, his boots were caked in mud. Smoke covered his face. Yet witnesses remembered one remarkable detail. He never appeared rushed. He spoke calmly, clearly, confidently. At one position, he noticed Marines firing almost continuously into the darkness. He raised his hand. Slow down. The young soldiers looked confused. The enemy wants you to waste ammunition. It was another lesson earned through years of combat. Fear often caused soldiers to fire blindly. Discipline won battles, not panic. The Marines adjusted their fire immediately. Every round became deliberate. Every burst controlled. Every target confirmed. That simple correction helped preserve ammunition during the most critical stage of the battle. As the fighting intensified, another group of heroes entered the story. The artillery observers. Positioned dangerously close to the front lines, these men directed American artillery with astonishing precision. Sometimes the shells landed less than 100 yards from Marine positions. The explosions were so close that dirt showered defenders inside their foxholes. But the risk was worth it. Each barrage tore massive holes through Japanese formations before they reached the perimeter. Several observers remained at their posts despite enemy fire falling directly around them. Without them, the Marine defense might have collapsed. The Japanese continued pushing forward. Again and again. Small groups slipped through the elephant grass, attempting to infiltrate gaps. Snipers fired from concealed positions. Machine gun teams established temporary firing points before being destroyed by Marine counterfire. The battle became one of constant movement. No position remained safe for long. One platoon would repel an assault only to discover another attack developing on its flank. Every Marine fought knowing that retreat simply wasn't an option. Behind them lay Henderson Field. The airfield represented far more than a runway. It housed the aircraft protecting the entire island. If Japanese forces captured it before daylight, American planes would be destroyed on the ground. Without those aircraft, Japanese naval forces could dominate the surrounding waters once again. Guadalcanal itself might eventually fall. Everyone understood the stakes. This wasn't simply about surviving the night. It was about the future of the Pacific War. As the hours crawled toward dawn, signs of Japanese exhaustion finally began appearing. Their attacks became less coordinated. Officers struggled to maintain control. Units had become separated inside the jungle. Communication broke down. Many soldiers no longer knew exactly where neighboring formations were located. Marine defenders noticed the change immediately. The assault still came, but the overwhelming momentum had begun to fade. Puller recognized the opportunity. Rather than allowing the enemy time to reorganize, he ordered concentrated fire against every suspected assembly area. Machine guns swept likely approach routes. Mortars blanketed the jungle. Artillery pounded enemy positions relentlessly. Every attempt to regroup was met with devastating fire. For the first time that night, the initiative slowly shifted toward the Marines. The eastern horizon began to change. At first, it was almost impossible to notice. The black sky softened into dark gray. Silhouettes of shattered trees slowly emerged. Shapes hidden throughout the night became visible. Dawn was coming. For Japanese commanders, daylight brought disaster. Their troops had relied upon darkness for concealment. Now the defenders could finally see exactly where the attacks were forming. Marine rifle fire became even more accurate. Machine guns identified targets immediately. Mortar crews adjusted with deadly precision. The remaining Japanese assaults quickly lost momentum. Some units attempted one final charge. Few reached the marine wire. Others began withdrawing into the jungle. Not as an organized force, as scattered survivors. The battle was over. Slowly the firing decreased, then stopped. An eerie silence settled across Henderson Field. It was unlike the silence before the battle. This silence carried the weight of everything that had happened. Exhausted Marines climbed from foxholes. Some could barely stand. Others immediately searched for missing friends. Medics moved across the battlefield treating the wounded. Engineers checked defensive positions for unexploded ordnance. Then daylight fully revealed what the darkness had hidden. The landscape before the marine lines was covered with Japanese dead. Bodies lay across open fields, tangled in barbed wire, inside shell craters and beneath shattered palm trees. Broken rifles, discarded helmets, destroyed machine guns, abandoned packs. The cost of the assault was almost impossible to comprehend. American casualties had also been significant. Many Marines who had laughed together only the day before would never leave Guadalcanal. Others carried wounds that would remain with them for life. Yet Henderson Field still stood. Its runway remained operational. Within hours, American aircraft were once again taking off, attacking Japanese ships and troop concentrations around the island. That single fact changed everything. Japan had committed thousands of soldiers to retake Henderson Field. They had failed. Their losses were catastrophic. Perhaps even more damaging was the realization that determined American defenders could withstand repeated night assaults that Japanese commanders had once believed unstoppable. The psychological impact spread throughout both armies. For the Marines, the battle proved they could defeat elite Japanese infantry in a major defensive engagement. Confidence soared. For Japan, the defeat marked another step toward losing the initiative in the Pacific. The campaign for Guadalcanal would continue for months, but Henderson Field remained firmly in American hands. Historians would later argue that the defense of the airfield became one of the pivotal moments of the entire Pacific War. Without Henderson Field, later Allied offensives might have been delayed or become far more costly. And at the center of that desperate night stood one man whose leadership inspired an entire battalion. Lieutenant Colonel Louis Chesty Puller. He never claimed to have won the battle alone. In fact, throughout his career, Puller consistently credited the Marines who fought beside him. He believed victories belonged to the men in the foxholes, not just the officers issuing orders. That attitude earned him something medals never could: the unwavering respect of generations of Marines. Puller would go on to become the most decorated Marine in U.S. history at the time of his retirement, earning 5 Navy Crosses, along with numerous other awards for extraordinary heroism. His name became synonymous with courage, aggressive leadership, and unwavering commitment to the Marines under his command. Even today, recruits at Marine Corps boot camp still learn about Chesty Puller's example. His famous saying, "Take me to the brig. I want to see the real Marines," and countless stories of his fearless leadership have become part of Marine Corps tradition. The night 1 Battalion held Henderson Field wasn't just a tactical victory. It was a defining moment that demonstrated discipline could overcome superior numbers, that preparation could defeat surprise, and that exceptional leadership could inspire ordinary men to achieve extraordinary things. On that dark night in Guadalcanal, the Marines didn't just defend an airfield. They defended the momentum of an entire war. And because they held the line until dawn, the road to ultimate Allied victory in the Pacific became just a little shorter. Chapter 4. As the smoke drifted away from Henderson Field, the full scale of the night's battle slowly came into view. The Marines who had survived emerged cautiously from their foxholes. Many had not slept in nearly 24 hours. Their uniforms were soaked with sweat, caked in mud, and stained with gunpowder. Faces that had entered the battle looking young now appeared years older. For several moments, almost no one spoke. The silence felt overwhelming after hours of non-stop explosions and gunfire. Only the distant cries of wounded soldiers and the rumble of American aircraft preparing for takeoff broke the quiet. The battle had lasted only one night. Its consequences would shape the Pacific War for years. Engineers immediately began repairing damaged defensive positions. Barbed wire was replaced. Machine gun nests were reinforced. Fresh ammunition was distributed across the perimeter. There was little time to celebrate. Every Marine knew the Japanese could attack again. Around Henderson Field, burial details moved carefully across the battlefield. The fallen, both American and Japanese, were counted, identified when possible, and laid to rest with dignity. It was one of the hardest duties any soldier could perform. For many Marines, the victory came with a painful cost. Friends they had eaten with only hours earlier were gone. Entire squads had been reduced to just a handful of survivors. Letters home would soon carry heartbreaking news to families thousands of miles away. Yet despite the grief, one fact stood above everything else. Henderson Field was still operational. Within hours of sunrise, American aircraft lifted off the runway once again. Fighters climbed into the clear Pacific sky. Dive bombers searched for Japanese troop concentrations. Scout aircraft scanned the surrounding ocean for enemy ships. Those flights proved something critical. Japan had failed in its primary objective. If the airfield had fallen, those aircraft would never have left the ground. Instead, they continued to dominate the skies over Guadalcanal. That air superiority slowly strangled Japanese efforts to reinforce the island. Every daylight convoy faced constant danger. Transport ships risked being bombed before reaching shore. Destroyers that had once moved freely now operated under the constant threat of American air attacks. This forced Japan to rely increasingly on nighttime supply missions, known to the Americans as the Tokyo Express. While fast, these destroyers could carry only limited supplies. Heavy artillery, large amounts of food, construction equipment, fuel, all became increasingly difficult to deliver. Japanese soldiers on Guadalcanal soon faced a new enemy: hunger. Many received only a fraction of their required daily food. Disease spread rapidly through exhausted units. Medical supplies became scarce. Even elite formations struggled to maintain combat effectiveness. Meanwhile, the Marines, despite suffering greatly themselves, slowly strengthened their position. Additional reinforcements arrived. Fresh artillery batteries came ashore. More aircraft joined the defense of Henderson Field. The balance of power had begun to shift. Military historians often describe Guadalcanal as the campaign where Japan permanently lost the strategic initiative in the Pacific. Before Guadalcanal, Japanese forces had largely dictated the pace of the war. After Guadalcanal, the Allies increasingly seized the offensive. Island by island, airfield by airfield, the long road toward Japan had begun. At the center of that turning point stood leaders who understood that wars are often decided by ordinary people performing extraordinary acts under impossible conditions. Chesty Puller was one of those leaders. Unlike the image of a commander who stayed safely behind the front lines, Puller believed leadership meant sharing danger with the men under his command. He walked the trenches. He checked machine gun positions. He spoke directly to young Marines. He exposed himself to the same bullets, shells, and uncertainty that everyone else faced. That style of leadership created something impossible to measure on a battlefield: trust. Marines believed that if Chesty Puller asked them to hold a position, he would be there with them. That confidence inspired remarkable determination during the darkest hours of combat. Puller's career did not end at Guadalcanal. He would continue fighting throughout World War II and later during the Korean War. Again and again, he demonstrated the same fearless leadership that had become his trademark. By the time he retired, Puller had earned 5 Navy Crosses, making him one of the most highly decorated Marines in American history. His reputation grew far beyond the medals on his uniform. Stories about his courage spread throughout the Marine Corps. Some were carefully documented. Others became legendary tales repeated by generations of Marines. Whether every story was completely accurate mattered less than what they represented. To Marines, Chesty Puller became the symbol of aggressive leadership, personal courage, and absolute commitment to mission and comrades. Even today, his name echoes through Marine Corps tradition. New recruits still hear instructors speak about Puller's example. Veteran Marines continue to quote him. His legacy has become part of the identity of the Corps itself. But history is rarely shaped by one individual alone. The Marines who defended Henderson Field that night came from every corner of America. Some had grown up on farms. Others came from crowded cities. Many were barely out of high school. They represented different backgrounds, different beliefs, and different dreams. Yet inside those muddy foxholes, none of those differences mattered. Every Marine depended upon the person beside him. Machine gun crews relied on ammunition carriers. Corpsmen risked their lives treating wounded strangers. Radio operators kept communication alive despite constant shell fire. Artillery observers calmly directed fire while enemy bullets struck around them. Pilots waited at dawn, ready to defend the airfield the infantry had protected throughout the night. Victory belonged to all of them. It serves as a reminder that history is often remembered through famous names, but it is built by countless people whose stories remain largely unknown. The defense of Henderson Field also transformed how military planners viewed jungle warfare. The campaign demonstrated the importance of combined arms coordination. Infantry, artillery, aviation, engineers, and logistics working together as one force. No single branch could have held the airfield alone. Without artillery, infantry positions might have collapsed. Without aviation, Japanese reinforcements would have continued arriving in overwhelming numbers. Without engineers, damaged defenses could not have been restored. Without logistics, ammunition and food would have disappeared. Every element supported the others. It became a model repeated throughout the remainder of the Pacific Campaign. Years after the war ended, veterans returned to Guadalcanal. Many searched for the places where they had fought. Some found little remaining. The jungle had reclaimed much of the battlefield. Nature had covered trenches, shell craters, and fighting positions beneath new growth. Birds now sang where machine guns once roared. Palm trees swayed peacefully over ground that had witnessed unimaginable violence. Time had healed the island. But not every memory. Survivors carried those experiences for the rest of their lives. Some rarely spoke about them. Others shared their stories with children and grandchildren, hoping future generations would understand the price of freedom. Today, historians continue studying the battle for Henderson Field because it offers timeless lessons about leadership, preparation, resilience, and teamwork under extreme pressure. It reminds us that courage is not the absence of fear. The Marines defending Henderson Field were afraid. They faced overwhelming odds against a determined enemy. They watched friends fall beside them. They fought through exhaustion, disease, and uncertainty. Their courage came from choosing to continue despite that fear. That is what makes their story endure. When the sun finally rose over Guadalcanal after that terrible night, it illuminated far more than a battlefield. It revealed the determination of a battalion that refused to break. It revealed a commander whose calm leadership inspired extraordinary resistance. And it revealed a turning point that helped shift the course of World War II in the Pacific. History often remembers massive invasions, famous speeches, and decisive victories. But sometimes the fate of a campaign depends on a single night. A single defensive line. A handful of machine guns. A commander who refused to leave his men. And a battalion that chose to stand its ground. The Marines who defended Henderson Field could not know what the future held. They could not know that historians would study their actions decades later. They could not know that Chesty Puller's name would become legendary within the United States Marine Corps. They knew only one thing. When dawn arrived, the American flag still flew over Henderson Field. And that was enough. If you enjoyed this documentary and want more cinematic stories of the battles, leaders, and forgotten heroes who shaped American military history, be sure to subscribe, leave a comment with the next battle you'd like to see covered, and join us for the next chapter in history. As the first rays of sunlight broke over Henderson Field, the battle was finally over. The Marines who stood their ground that night had done far more than defend an airfield. They had protected a strategic foothold that helped shift the momentum of the Pacific War and proved that determination, discipline, and courageous leadership could overcome overwhelming odds. At the center of that incredible story stood Chesty Puller, a commander whose calm under fire and unwavering commitment to his Marines would become legendary. But the victory belonged to every Marine, corpsman, artilleryman, pilot, and support soldier who refused to give up, even when the odds seemed impossible. Their sacrifice reminds us that history is often shaped not by the largest armies, but by ordinary people who choose extraordinary courage when it matters most. More than 80 years later, the battle for Henderson Field remains one of the greatest examples of leadership, resilience, and brotherhood in American military history. It is a story that deserves to be remembered and never forgotten. If you enjoyed this documentary and want to see more cinematic stories about World War II, the U.S. Marines, forgotten battles, military heroes, and the moments that changed history, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new documentary. If this story taught you something new, please give this video a thumbs up. It helps more people discover these incredible stories from history. And we'd love to hear from you. What World War II battle or American military hero should we cover next? Leave your suggestion in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and until next time, remember, history isn't just about the past, it's about the people whose courage shaped the world we live in today.